Good afternoon, everyone. This is Michael Morris. I am co-chair of the policy team of the LEAD Center. So glad so many of you across the country have joined us today for our first webinar this year, Creating an Inclusive Workforce System, Implementing Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, Section 188's Equal Opportunity Provision. I will turn this over to Elizabeth Jennings just for some logistical issues. Elizabeth?
Yep. Welcome, everyone. When listening to today's webinar, the audio is being broadcast through your computer. Please make sure your speakers are turned on or your headphones are plugged in. You can control the audio broadcast via the audio broadcast panel. If you accidentally close the panel, you can reopen by going to the Communicate menu. It's at the top of the screen, and choosing Join Audio Broadcast. If you do not have sound capabilities on your computer, or if you prefer to listen by phone, you can dial in. The number is 415-655-0001 or 855-749-4750. The meeting code is 662-292-984, and you do not need to enter an attendee ID. Real-time captioning is provided during this webinar. The captions can be found in the Media Viewer panel, which appears in the lower right corner of the webinar platform. If you want to make the Media Viewer panel larger, you can minimize other panels like chat, Q&A, and/or participants. We hope you will submit questions during the webinar. Please use the chat box or the Q&A box to send any questions you have during the webinar to Nakia Matthews, and we will direct the questions accordingly during the Q&A portion. If you are listening by phone and not logged into the webinar, you may also ask questions by emailing questions to nmatthews@ndi-inc.org. This webinar is being recorded, and the materials will be placed on the LEAD Center website at the link that's on your screen. We'll also be putting that into the chat box periodically if you didn't catch it now. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box to send a message to the host, Nakia Matthews, or you may also email Nakia at nmatthews@ndi-inc.org.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This webinar today is part of the joint activities of the National Disability Institute with the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP. The LEAD Center, the National Center on Leadership for the Employment and Economic Advancement of People with Disabilities, is a collaborative of disability, workforce, and economic empowerment organizations led by National Disability Institute. We're in our fourth year of 5-year funding, and we're glad to once again help today with providing outstanding subject matter experts at both a federal and a state level to help all of us understand more opportunities within implementation of the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. The LEAD Center's mission is to advance sustainable individual and systems level change that results in improved, competitive, integrated employment and economic self-sufficiency outcomes for individuals across the spectrum of disability. If you have not had an opportunity to visit our website, please do at www.leadcenter.org, where you can see the work we have been doing over the last several years with ODEP and many other partners at a national, state, and local level in the public and private sector. You will also see there an extraordinary new web-based platform which will allow you to look and compare the work on employment outcomes across states. And you will learn more about that on the LEAD Center website. Today, the agenda is focused on looking at particularly Section 188 and its implications from a national, state, and local level. After my being able to share with you a brief overview about Section 188, kind of leveling the playing field for some of you who are less familiar with those provisions of the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, we're going to turn to presenters both from ODEP as well as the Civil Rights Center, as well as the Employment and Training Administration, and also be joined by key collaborators in the state of Missouri. The webinar outcomes today is for all of us to get a deeper understanding of the critical elements of Section 188, promising practices within the Section 188 Disability Reference Guide we will be utilizing, and hope you will have a chance to take a look at that reference guide if you haven't already. We're going to be looking at the relationship between Section 188 and other Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act disability-related provisions. As I shared, we're going to gain a deeper understanding from some of the work in Missouri on how Section 188 is operationalized and implemented to make a difference in effective and meaningful participation of individuals with disabilities who use the workforce development system. So before we go forward, I do want to introduce today's speakers. Christopher Button, Supervisor, Workforce Systems Policy, Office of Disability Employment Policy, U.S. Department of Labor. Roger Ocampo, Chief, Office of Compliance and Policy, Civil Rights Center, U.S. Department of Labor. And Kimberly Vitelli, Deputy Administrator, Employment and Training Administration, U.S. Department of Labor. We'll also be hearing from Jamie Robinson with the National Disability Institute, Manager of Financial Empowerment and Workforce. And finally, we will be hearing from the work going on in collaboration with the Lead Center, Missouri, EO Practice Network, Danielle Smith, State Equal Opportunity Officer, Missouri Division of Workforce Development, and Yvonne Wright, Director of Business Outreach and Workforce Development, Missouri Vocational Rehabilitation Services. As I said at the beginning of this webinar today, let's first kind of level the playing field and make sure we understand sort of the basic elements of what is Section 188. Section 188, for most of you are aware, was a part of also the Workforce Investment Act. It is, again, picked up and definitely a major set of provisions within the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. What Section 188 does is implements the non-discrimination and equal opportunity provisions of the law, which is contained in Section 188 of the statute. It prohibits discrimination not just related to people with disabilities, but also on the grounds of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, political affiliation or belief as key protected classes. We also know that Section 188 requires that reasonable accommodations be provided to qualified individuals with disabilities under specific certain circumstances as they really enter and proceed through the many services and supports offered by the workforce development system. We do know, as I mentioned, that these Section 188 provisions are identical to those that were in the prior law. And we also want to share with you, for those digging deeper, that the regulations for Section 188 can be found at 29 Code of Federal Regulations, CFR 30A. Well, first, who does Section 188 apply to? Recipients, as defined in the law, are any entity to which financial assistance under the Workforce Innovation Act, Title I, is extended. So who does that mean? It includes state-level agencies that are administering the money coming from the federal government down into the states and local communities under Title I. It also impacts state employment security agencies, state and local workforce investment development boards, one-stop operators, service providers, including eligible training providers who are receiving funding from the workforce development system, helping people build on their skills and moving along career pathways. It also impacts on-the-job training employers, Job Corps contractors and center operators, and programs and activities that are part of the one-stop delivery system operated by one-stop partners. I do want you to be aware that there is, and it was released last year, some 6 months ago, by Secretary of Labor Tom Perez. This is a critical document that can help you really move from legal and regulatory requirements to how do we make this work for us in our state. There was months and months of effort last year by CRC, ETA, and ODEP together that put together, with the collaboration with the LEAD Center, promising practices in achieving universal access and equal opportunity, a Section 188 Disability Reference Guide. This reference guide offers numerous examples, practical examples, culled from the field, culled from states and localities across the country, from conversations also at a federal level, and the result is putting all of this together in one practical reference guide. We do know that this reference guide is broken down into 2 parts. The first contains examples highlighting some of the ways American Job Centers can meet legal obligations, broken out into sections on universal access, equal opportunity, and then governance and implementation. But it also has a second part which contains the language from the current Section 188 regulations that form the basis of promising practices and includes hyperlinks directly to these promising practices in Part 1. We know that the reference guide is not the be-all and end-all. This is not the only way you can look at many practical and creative ways of providing equal opportunity and protecting against discrimination for individuals with disabilities. But we also want to be clear that this reference guide does not create new legal mandates or requirements or change any current legal requirements. These promising practices do not preclude you from coming up with others, exciting ideas that I hope you will share with us over this next year as we really get going all across the country with the implementation of state plans and then plans at a local level in workforce development areas. And we must also say that adoption of any of these or all of these promising practices does not in of itself guarantee compliance with the law or the regulations. What we wanted to share with you quickly is just some examples out of the reference guide. First, related to reasonable accommodations. An application or registration process that enables a qualified applicant with a disability to be considered for benefits, services, training, or employment that the qualified applicant desires. So there may be something you might do that makes sure there is effective and meaningful participation in any step or stage in the process of getting supports from an American Job Center and the workforce development system. You may look at reasonable accommodations as a way of enabling a qualified individual with a disability to perform the essential functions of a job or to receive aid, benefits, services, or training equal to that provided to qualified individuals without disabilities. Or you may be able to enable a qualified individual with a disability to enjoy the same benefits and privileges of the aid, benefits, services, training, or employment as are enjoyed by others similarly situated who are using the workforce development system to meet their goals related to employment, hopefully beyond employment, career pathways, and advancing their economic self-sufficiency. Some examples of equal opportunity is prohibiting discrimination in any way against individuals with disabilities. That can be done by providing reasonable accommodations or reasonable modifications of policies, practices, and procedures for individuals with disabilities. It could be using the same processes for all customers in the name of, or an approach of universal design, including individuals with disabilities for selecting participants in all programs, administering programs in the most integrated setting appropriate, ensuring effective communication, including providing auxiliary aids and services where necessary, and providing programmatic and architectural accessibility. We know in terms of some examples of promising practices and prohibiting discrimination is a covered entity. This could be a training provider, it could be an employer, it could be the workforce development system, the American Job Center itself, covered entities rejects all job offers from employers that will not accept applications from individuals with disabilities. Covered entities do not stereotype individuals with disabilities when evaluating their skills, abilities, interests, or needs. Covered entities select locations for the delivery of services or any type of support to job seekers with disabilities that are fully accessible and hopefully near public transportation system, so transportation is not a barrier. And covered entities regularly review eligibility criteria for training and other services to eliminate discriminatory criteria. Some further examples in terms of promising practices might be just having in place a clear process easily understood by those who enter the workforce development system of how to request a reasonable accommodation. Training and information regarding the process of identifying and providing reasonable accommodations, including a description of the negotiation, the interactive process between staff and the individual with a disability as you go about looking at what might be a reasonable accommodation. A process for reviewing reasonable accommodation decisions where necessary, and posting the policies and procedures related to reasonable accommodation on an accessible website, in public areas within the American Job Center, and then including them as well in written outreach materials. Providing modification of policies and practices, covered entities have a written policy explaining clearly the obligation to make reasonable modifications to policies, practices, and procedures to make sure there really is an equal opportunity for participation by individuals with disabilities, certainly on par and comparable to people without disabilities. Some further examples of just integrating, providing services in the most integrated setting appropriate. First, and probably the most common example, and we're certainly seeing changes after the number of years of implementation of the Workforce Investment Act, and that is when a person with a disability comes into an AJC and there is either an immediate or through discussion and understanding this is a person with a disability, there is not an automatic referral to state vocational rehabilitation programs, but decisions of reference to VR are done on a case-by-case basis and, in fact, could be a collaborative part of a process that is part of really negotiating, braiding, and blending resources, could be part of an integrated resource team. Another example is that individuals with disabilities have access to the full range of services, even when that might include some modification. That could be one-on-one teaching around interviewing techniques rather than just simply there's just one classroom, there is an accommodation because of the nature of the individual's disability. Again, the overall goal is that the person with a disability, not just through reasonable accommodation, but and not just in terms of integrated setting appropriate. I think we're all learning about new meaning and new nuance to what does it mean to be programmatically accessible. So I want to turn from that just quick overview of some basic understanding of what is Section 188 all about. It's about equal opportunity. It's about effective and meaningful participation in the workforce development system. It is certainly about protecting against discrimination. I want to turn to Roger Ocampo, Chief Officer of Compliance and Policy for the Civil Rights Center at the U.S. Department of Labor, with just a few thoughts on where CRC is and about the status of the proposed rulemaking regarding Section 188. Roger?
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody. For those of you who don't know, we issued the 29 CFR Part 38 regulations because the WIOA in its text required us to. We didn't have time to do the full breadth of changes that are needed to modernize the law. So we are fixing to really soon a notice of proposed rulemaking. For those of you that don't know how things work, the government will issue this notice of proposed rulemaking asking for your comments. You're more than welcome to read our proposed rule and submit comments to us through regulations.gov. We will look at all those comments and draft a final rule, and then that final rule will become law, become implemented. The important thing for you guys is that what we're really excited about is it brings in all the changes in law since the first Section 88 rules were written more than 10 years ago. It brings in the effects of the ADA Amendments Act, the idea that you're going to spend less time determining whether or not someone's covered as a covered disability and more time figuring out how do you accommodate them. Oh, yes. Someone just reminded me to point out that there's a tie-in with the guide and the rules. When we were developing the guide, we were working on these regulations. These two things are fit hand in glove. They work together very well. The nice thing about it, too, under the new WIOA rules, which ETA will be talking about, is there's a lot of emphasis to make sure that you're serving individuals with disabilities. When we protect the floor, ETA wants to go above that, and this guide just sits in so nicely into that. This idea of a promising practices. I can't tell you how to run your organization. I can just tell you whether or not you meet the legal requirements. This is really the beauty of us working with ETA and ODEP, is then we can go above that. And that's why we really emphasized in part one of the guide, the promising practices. The emphasis is on that. Yes, you have to do it. That's the law in the second part. You have to do it. Get in the first part, how to do it. It's really the key. So that's kind of really my big push in this NPRM. I encourage people to read it, look at it, see if you agree with our positions on things, and then comment on it. We really like to get your input into it to make sure we can make the strongest law possible. And that, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Let me turn next to Jamie Robinson, member of the Lead Center team at National Disability Institute, to introduce our guest presenters from the state of Missouri.
Great, thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. So before turning it over to the Missouri team, I wanted to give kind of a bit of background on the work between Lead and Missouri kind of leading up to this point. And the collaboration actually started a little while back. My colleague had the opportunity to meet the Director of Training and Employment of St. Louis at a conference, and their discussions led to how can we work together to do something innovative that would help get the information in the 188 guide out to states and local areas and really help motivate workforce to start using it. So that's kind of what ignited the pilot that Danielle Smith, the Missouri State EO officer, who will talk more about that in a minute, and the strategies that they've employed to improve equal access. I also had the opportunity last summer to work with Danielle, and she has an incredible team as well, along with Yvonne Wright, who is the speaker today. She's the director of the Missouri's Business Outreach and Workforce Development for VR. I attended an employer event in Missouri last summer called Accommodations for Success, and it really was the result of a collaborative effort between a number of diversified partners, including the St. Louis Workforce and Voc Rehabilitation. Also another result of kind of Missouri's really strong commitment, emphasis at how do we improve the employment of people with disabilities. And the event drew more than 100 HR professionals from over 60 businesses. All came to learn about the challenges that people with disabilities face in the job market, as well as, of course, solutions that can be implemented. Really incredible event. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Danielle and Yvonne. Their partnership really between Workforce and VR that I've had the opportunity and pleasure to kind of witness and be a part of is really a best practice in and of itself. I can tell you that they do this work around Section 188 and disability together in tandem, and it's a team who clearly values each other's input, systems expertise around universal access and equal opportunity, and I've learned a lot from them. They're really an incredible example of how states, through partnership, can kind of take some real concrete action steps using the guide. So I think it'll be a great presentation today that you're a part of. So with that, Danielle, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. I want to thank the LEAD Center for this opportunity to present in today's webinar. I also want to thank Michael Holmes from St. Louis City, who is the WIP director there, for initiating this partnership with LEAD. We've been able to benefit as a state and as a workforce system from this partnership. Just to give some background, with this partnership, in the spring of 2015, the LEAD Center, Missouri State Workforce EO Unit, VR, our local EO officers, and the WIP directors put together a survey to analyze how staff engage with customers that have disabilities. We used the Section 188 Disability Reference Guide as a blueprint for improving access and equal opportunity to Missouri's workforce system. In our pilot, our team decided to focus on disability because it cuts across all of the prohibited bases of discrimination in our workforce system. And it is the only minority group that anyone can join at any time. So in today's presentation, I will summarize the outcomes from our job seeker survey, and Yvonne Wright with VR will discuss the outcomes from our employer survey, Just to let you know, we emailed job seekers that have registered in our workforce system in the last 6 months a link to complete this survey. We had 670 job seekers to respond to this survey. We asked our job seekers, have you accessed the services of one of Missouri's job centers within the last 6 months? 670 job seekers responded. 8% of those disclosed that their disability at the job center to our staff. And we saw this as a positive because we typically see 2 to 3% disclose their disability. Next, we asked our job seekers, how did you learn about the Missouri Job Center? 57% said that they found it on their own, 6% were referred by a community service agency, 11% were referred by a friend, and 26% said other. And we were able to dig a little deeper into the survey, and we found out that those were UI recipients or they have used our services in the past. One of the next questions we asked, when visiting the job center, did you find our staff welcoming? Overall, 94% said our staff were welcoming. 6% said job centers could improve on customer service. So we're using this as a way to improve our customer service in our centers. Missouri has 31 full-service job centers, and we wanted to ask our job seekers if it was easy to access by car or public transportation. 94% of all respondents thought it was easy to access by car or public transportation, but those that disclosed a disability rated this question lower at 87%. We asked our job seekers about the accessibility of our job centers. 98% responded that our job centers were physically accessible. 96% of those that disclosed they had a disability responded that it was accessible. So we thought that that was positive as well. We wanted to know if our job seekers were able to find information they were looking for in our job centers. 88% responded yes. Now, 76% of the people with a disability said yes, and some of those job seekers that disclosed a disability commented that they needed more help, that they had computer issues, and we could improve on our customer service. Of those that disclosed a disability, we asked, did you request an accommodation? And 20% said yes. As a follow-up question to requesting an accommodation, we asked our job seekers, did you receive your requested accommodation? We had 5 individuals respond that they did not receive their requested accommodation. Some of the comments we received from this question were, no one can help me with the computer, and not able to find part-time work. So we're using this information to train our staff on disability accommodation. So on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being very positive, we asked our job seekers, how would you rate your overall experience with Missouri Job Center? 75% of our customers rated our centers 8 or above. 7% of our customers rated our centers 4 and below. Now, job seekers that disclosed a disability rated our job centers an average of 7.3, while job seekers that did not disclose rated our job centers an average of 8.3. We have utilized Section 188 reference guide to update and revise our case note policy, which I will discuss next in this presentation. But moving forward, we plan to continue to survey our staff, job seekers, and employers on an annual and biannual basis. Our local boards are creating a strategic outreach plan to market job center services in their regions, and we plan to create online disability resources for our business customers. So here's some brief information we created as a result of the Section 188 reference guide. Our DWD service note policy, we revised our policy to include the purpose, requirements for the service note with a focus on confidentiality. This will include medical conditions or appointments or people with disabilities. We don't want our staff documenting that in the service note. We are also stressing that confidentiality of someone's criminal record or background should not be discussed in our service notes. We have provided examples of appropriate and inappropriate service notes, and we've explained how service notes are a part of a customer's permanent record, and it can be used in discrimination complaints and legal and financial reams. In our training, we are emphasizing the accuracy and cruciality of, to include accuracy of date and time of conversation. You should double check your facts. You should record facts relevant only to the customer's eligibility for services. You shouldn't add opinions or assumptions. In our system, multiple agencies read our service notes, so we want to make sure that they are professional. And customers may request a copy of their service notes, so we want to make sure that our staff are being trained on recording the services provided in the center only. This will conclude my portion of the presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Yvonne Wright from VR.
Thank you, Danielle. I really appreciate your lead-in, and it's an honor and a privilege to be a part of this, particularly standing beside Danielle and kind of getting a chance to talk about what Missouri has been up to. Just a very quick, brief history. My title is Director of Business Outreach and Workforce Development for Vocational Rehabilitation, and I have to tell you that I've had that workforce development title for about 10 years. So what's been really nice for us in Missouri is that we did not have WIOA hit us in 2014 and try to figure out who was who and start trying to figure out how we were going to collaborate. We have been collaborating for a long time. What Michael Holmes brought to the table and what Danielle and I have been involved in with the Lead Center has just been an enhancement and a great opportunity for us to learn more about ourselves and to be at the same table together. We have taken a very pretty strong leadership role in the WIOA planning in Missouri and voc rehab. We definitely see ourselves as equal partners, made sure that we are at the table in the planning and the facilitation. And I think it would be safe to say that our role is to be a good resource to dispel some myths about serving people with disabilities. And always remember that sometimes just communicating with people as they come through the door and understanding what their needs are can solve a lot of myths and dispel a lot of misconceptions. So we see ourselves as conduits to other disability resources. One of the things that I'm most excited about as we move forward in WIOA planning is that in Missouri we have formed a committee for the one-stop certification, and that is heavily influenced by people not only from vocational rehabilitation, but also our statewide centers for independent living who have been involved in the past in some of our disability training we've done with the American Job Centers in Missouri. So I'm just very excited about our future and hoping that we can be a great asset and resource as we move forward. My job today, though, is to go over the employer survey results. When we met with the Lead Center and talked about what we wanted to look at, we really wanted to try to capture what was going on with the employers that were working with the career centers. The Missouri Workforce IT Department disseminated the surveys to customers statewide, employer customers that accessed the Career Center was over the past 6 months. We had 87 respondents on the first part of the survey that asked about current business practices around disability employment and accommodation, and 20 of those employers completed the survey and provided their name and contact information, which I'll provide a little more information about in a minute. One of the questions that we asked the employer was, does your company have a diversity policy that includes disability? And as you can see, we had 65% who said yes, 18% who said no, 17% that said not sure. We also asked, does your company have an accommodation process in place for job applicants and for employees? And again, those numbers were very, very close to the numbers of the first question. About 2/3 of the employers answered that they already had something in place. We also asked if the employers had an employer resource group or affinity group specific to disability on site, and frankly, I haven't seen, from my own practice, I haven't seen a lot of employers in Missouri that have yet developed these, so even 15% was a pretty decent number in Missouri of those who already have those in place. And as you can see, 59% still do not at this time. We also asked if your company's marketing materials include or depict employees with disabilities. As you can see, again, these are Missouri employers or employers who have locations in Missouri. 36% was yes, 48% no, 16% not sure. We also asked if the company engages in any targeted outreach to job seekers with disabilities, either directly or through a partnership. And as you can see, we have some work to do, but we did hear back from those employers, and we still have more no's on that end than we do yes at this point. But it does give us some good information and foundation for what we feel is going to be collaborative outreach to these employers. We also asked if their company has a formal or informal process to customize and modify a position to meet the needs of the current or returning employee with a disability. So basically, accommodations. And as you can see, 68% said yes, 23% said no, and we had some that were not sure. We decided when we were putting out this survey to go a little outside the box and actually ask the employers if they had a particular need area that we might be able to serve. And we did allow them on this question that you see here to actually identify and provide us with contact information. We did this for a couple of reasons. Obviously, if we're going to put out a survey and ask for some input, we'd certainly like to give anybody who wanted the opportunity to get further information from us to be able to do this, but also, to be honest with you, it opened up an excellent collaborative opportunity for us, which I'll tell you about in a minute, how we were choosing to address that. But what we did is we had some set questions that we asked them. As you can see here, how many would like information on incorporating disability into your diversity initiatives, implementing accommodation policies, looking at employer resource groups, incorporating disability into marketing materials, targeted outreach to job seekers with disabilities, and other. And just to give you a quick example under other of some things they said, one company said that they focus on, this particular company focuses on some business development for Latino entrepreneurs and wanted some information on Latino business outreach. So that was a unique request. And that kind of tells us what we have going on. We also had someone that said they wanted to be able to retrain and work with youth that are in danger to self or others. Open to hiring, but must keep other employees and other staff and clients safe. Just wanted to give you some idea of what came out of that piece of it. What we have decided to do with this information is, as I said, the employers who indicated that they wanted more information were given the opportunity to identify if they wanted any kind of follow-up. And as you can see, a majority of individuals did not ask for that follow-up, but we did have a group of about a dozen employers who said, yes, we do want some follow-up. And they identified what areas they want to follow up in. So what we decided to do is to work collaboratively on this. Since the survey came from the Career Center, we clearly want to continue to include our partners. So actually what has happened since then is that I have met with my counterpart over at Workforce Development that handles business outreach, and we sat down and we came up with a game plan, and we're assigning from each agency a business outreach specialist that is going to be, they're going to sit down and they're going to review these requests, and they're going to both reach out together to these employers. And then even though our expertise is in disability outreach, I have made sure that my staff will include the DWD representative at all employer outreach if there are efforts. If there are visits, we will be bringing the workforce development individual with us as well, because we really want this to be a collaborative effort. So with that, I think I will move on ahead and turn it over to the next speaker, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you, Yvonne. Really, you know, a model practice in itself, EO, working with VR, working with the workforce development system across the local areas in the state. Surveying helps, you know, bring out both from employers as well as customers with disabilities, what are the issues, and then you're looking at ways you can take those on and really try to improve effective and meaningful participation for people with disabilities. I want to go next to our panel of leaders at Employment and Training Administration, Civil Rights Center, and ODEP. And let me start with Kim Vitelli at ETA. From a standpoint of ETA, you have the big role related to where we are now in implementation as states are drafting plans. They're in many states, they're having comment period, listening sessions, trying to get as many stakeholders' input on really where their plan is going, both in big picture, strategic thinking, and then operationally. But from the standpoint of ETA, sort of a big open-ended question, what's the importance of Section 188, and how does ETA look at this within this critical first year of WIOA implementation?
Sure, and hi everyone. I also want to let you know that we have in the room with us one of our experts from ETA, David Jones, who will also be chiming in. You know, I think that the purpose of 188 and what the 188 Best Practices Guide is all about is about making sure that everyone can benefit from every program in an American Job Center. So the 188 provision, like the letter of the law, as well as the spirit of the law and the practices in the guide itself, all dovetail really nicely with how the Department of Labor and Department of Education have been trying to implement WIOA and all the efforts being put forth by the states and local areas. 188 and the spirit and the letter and the best practices all have, I think, a lot of relevance for several different activities that are really hot and heavy right now in the workforce system. It's very relevant for how states think through their state planning and how they bring different partners to the table to together envision strategically how they want to deliver services. It is relevant for some of the policy setting, like Missouri was mentioning about thinking through how one-stop certification is going to work. Those are the kind of policy questions that states are grappling with right now. And it's also really important to some of the operational discussions about how different one-stop partners are going to come together, who will be physically present, who will have a different kind of presence, how often people will be on site, what will the site be, how will the site be laid out, how will services be delivered, and how will services be coordinated in the one-stop. All of those from the big picture strategic to the policy decisions to the very operational down to the sort of granular discussion that our colleagues from Missouri were talking about the training about how you take care of case notes. I mean, 188 has relevance, and the spirit and the letter of 188 have relevance for all of those things. And so it's really relevant to all the big picture and little picture conversations that are happening right now. So I mean, one of the things that I really like about the Best Practices Guide is that all of those practices are ones that somebody has done. Somebody's done all of this. A lot of, I think you're going to read pieces of the Best Practices Guide and say, yeah, I knew this. You know, this is not radical. But it would also be hard to find anybody who's done all of them. So the guide in that sense is really scalable. So wherever you are in your continuum of growth and transition, the guide has probably got something for you.
Thank you, Kim. I'm going to turn quickly to Roger. And from a Civil Rights Center perspective, again, as we were just talking and Kim shared, you know, states are in this planning process. The guide offers lots of practical ways for states and local areas to think about equal opportunity for individuals with disabilities. One of the things I'm struck by is 188 is not have a lot of new mandates. It's a continuation of mandates that were in the Workforce Investment Act. So at CRC, you've been out there for some time looking at states. What perhaps, you know, is there a short list of tips from things you're seeing from states that maybe can give people a heads up think about this type of activity or this type of policy development and implementation? I wonder if you can share some from your experiences within CRC.
What an interesting little question. And here's the thing. Kim said it all. She said it really brilliantly. What I liked about the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act is it took this idea of serving people with disabilities outside of the equal opportunity arena and put it into the programmatic side. So it's not just the equal opportunity officers talking about it. It's the administrators talking about it, the people that make the decisions, the people that decide how programs are run. They are talking about it. This is a part that I love. Without them, without their support, without their commitment, all I'm doing is herding cats. That's the best way to do it. So I like this. When the law came out, I love the fact that it was mentioned elsewhere. I should mention that we personally, who worked with Senator Harkin for many years, that's now on the CRC staff. So we have a recognized expert in disability law that knows this law particularly because he helped write it. So as a matter of information, if you need help, it's a resource available to all you. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Roger. I'm going to turn back to Kim one last time because I know your time is limited. Maybe because it will be your closing thoughts, and I know we'll have access to David Jones as well. But any advice to states or local areas beyond what you already shared, which was this very rich picture that certainly Roger amplified on, is this is beyond legal requirements and compliance. This is about effective service delivery for people regardless of their backgrounds, gender, race, or disability. But I know it's a little early. The state plans, except for 1 or 2, are not in yet at ETA. But any last-minute advice to states who are certainly trying to finish up the process in the early months this year of putting their plan together of this intersect with 188?
Yeah, I think that, you know, the ability to rely on your peers has seemed to be the most useful and most impactful way for states to to think about how best to move forward. That doesn't mean that you can't also think of new ways, but I have been so impressed and gratified by how much states have been offering each other support and sharing best practices across states. Obviously, as feds, we're here to help, but some of the best practical advice comes from the field, and you know, to give a shout out to ODIP and LEAD, I mean, these webinars are such a good way for states to hear from each other. So I think, you know, keep doing that. And I think the other piece of advice or thought is about how valuable your investment of time into partnerships can be. And you know, I mean, this is things that people out in the field know better than I would, but the time that you put into a partnership with that long haul view is so invaluable. There's, you know, we're all in information overload. Every leader in a state and local workforce setting is in information overload and taking things in through a fire hose, and so automatically you sort of limit what you look at. and just sort of let some things keep rolling. But the time and effort that it takes to develop those cross-program partnerships, which goodness knows really takes time and effort, and is time that maybe you didn't have on your calendar. Establishing those partnerships and then actually caring and feeding those partnerships is so valuable in the long run, and some of the best innovations that we've seen have been as a result of those long-standing partnerships that sometimes have a quick hit, sure, but often it's the long-term partnership that is the most fruitful. So, you know, it's been so impressive how many states and local areas have been really investing time with each other and making sure that different partner programs are working together. So, you know, it's not so much, maybe this is different than what you were asking, Michael, but it's not so much how to get to the state plan, but then how to keep going. And that's, don't stop having those meetings after you know, get the last signature on your state plan. Keep staying in touch with each other and maintaining those relationships, because they're the things that are going to really be most fruitful in the end.
Thank you, Kim, and I appreciate, I know how busy you are, is giving us some of your thoughts and time today. The last suggestions are just such a great point, which is, yes, by chronologically the timelines for implementation of the Act, everyone is focused on the plan development right now. But key to the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, and probably even more emphasized than the prior law, is this notion of collaboration. And that doesn't stop in the production of a plan, as you said. It's not a short-term vision or goal. It's to continue. And Missouri today was an example of that, with the Equal Opportunity Officer working with the Vocational Rehabilitation Services System. Everyone has a piece of the puzzle here. No single part of this multi-system collaboration is going to be effective without that continued dialogue and looking at how do we braid and blend resources. So thank you for that point. I'm going to turn next to ODEP and Chris Button. I'll move from the state planning process today. ODEP and the LEAD Center has been very focused on really finding those areas of cross-system collaboration that can, as Kim brought that theme out, making a difference. Do you have some advice in terms of, again, using the touch point of Section 188, advice to the hundreds of listeners on this webinar? How can we make sure people with disabilities are engaged in the planning and then ultimately how services are delivered?
Well, thank you, Michael. I think that Kim and Roger have just really put on the table some wonderful thoughts about the system as it is rolling out. We here at the Department of Labor, when you think about partnerships, I can tell the country who's listening that Employment and Training Administration and Civil Rights Center and Department of Ed, RSA, and certainly inclusive of ODEP, have a wonderful partnership with those systems as well as others that are identified in the WIOA, be it, TANF or any of the others. And that in the cross-agency team, as WIOA planning proceeds, I am so pleased to let everyone know that disability is very much a part of the dialogue, and I know that we have such strong support at the highest level, certainly, of the Department of Labor to make sure that that disability is a part of the WIOA on the implementation at the ground level. In fact, Michael, as you said when you first started the webinar today, we have unprecedented language inclusive of disability really for the first time in the law. So it just creates this amazing opportunity for the systems, as Kim said, to be collaborative and to be working together. And one of the things that we have seen at ODEP, not only through the LEAD Center, but also through other projects that we have, such as our Employment First State Leadership Mentoring Program, where we are in a community of practice with 43 states and intensively providing TA in 19 states, WIOA implementation and inclusive of other systems as the states are thinking about putting their plans together has been very much a part of their dialogue. And so as they're thinking about partnership and collaboration, they're also reaching out to systems, maybe the mental health system, maybe the Medicaid system, as potential partners, and systems that do deal and work with and provide services to youth and adults with disabilities. So really an exciting opportunity for partnership and collaboration across systems that have not traditionally been a part of the former WIA system in the past. And I think that the 188 guide gives us some great examples of things that can be done as we're thinking about reaching out to those systems, as well as we think about implementing practices within the actual AJC at that level. I want to give kudos to Yvonne and Danielle. I think it was absolutely fascinating the work that you are doing there in Missouri. I'm thrilled that at least one of the prompts for you doing that was the 188 guide and the work that the LEAD Center is doing. And I have to tell you, as we spent 2 years, ETA, CRC, and ODEP, putting together the 188 guide and filling in all of the examples that we were able to collect from the MOAs that states had put in, from conversations with the Disability Employment Initiative grantees, from conversations with other leaders in intermediary organizations such as NASWA. I had never personally thought about case notes. And what do? If you are a counselor at the AJC and someone discloses disability, what do? And I think the work that you have done to look at that issue, which emerged in your own survey, is just so really informative, I think, to the rest of the country as an example of a very granular level of what to think about as you implement the 188 provisions. And Michael, that was kind of long and rambling, and so I apologize. I'm not sure I answered your question, so please feel free to come back. But we are really excited about the 188 guide. I know when you pick it up and you look at it, it seems very dense with information. But if you get beyond that fact and start looking at the individual examples, I think you can get really excited about little things that can be done within the context of your, if it's an AJC, if it's the VR program, if it's one of the other partners attached to the workforce development system, little things that can make just an enormous difference, like the examples that we had today.
Thank you, Chris. And I'm going to, in the time remaining, I want to just get through a few more questions. I'm going to go from these broad questions, very much more specific, to the whole area of the new area of career services and career pathways. Section 188, as we said at the beginning of this webinar, provides protections of equal opportunity, effective and meaningful participation of individuals with disabilities throughout every part of the service delivery under the Act. And won't make this specific to anyone, but maybe one of the panelists would like to take this on, and that is, do you see ways that Section 188 can provide some protections for people with disabilities so they do get the same level of access to career services and career pathways opportunities? I know already anecdotally, even before this new law is kicking in, too often I have seen people with disabilities not meeting literacy requirements of a community college, and as a result being denied that opportunity for a new skills certification program. I know with other cases, the challenge has not been the accessibility of the AJC's website, but the challenge is the accessibility of that training provider. It could be a community college, it could be other entities that are contracted with by the workforce development system. I just wonder, anyone on the panel have any thoughts of practical ideas? One is, of course, to be more vigilant in making sure these things don't happen, but other thoughts on this. Really, this is the emerging new workforce development system, stackable credentials, not just a job, but finding career pathways. Anyone want to take that on?
Michael, hi, this is David. I'm from ETA, and I work closely with Kim and in ODEP. And I think one of the things that the guide pretty much emphasizes is universal access. And I think if that is in the forefront of planning, that pretty much maximizes equal opportunity for all of those that are using the services. And I think one of the great things that we have in place right now is the Disability Employment Initiative, and that pretty much creates good models to follow on universal access. And so we encourage folks to look into the Disability Employment Initiative, see how we're utilizing universal access that benefits both populations with disabilities and without.
Great, thank you for that answer. I'm going to turn to, and hopefully you're still on, Danielle and Yvonne. This is probably the classic conundrum. We have been facing it for years. I've seen real changes in recent years, but here's the scenario. The person with a disability walks into the American Job Center, whether that's operated by the city, the county, a for-profit, a not-for-profit, all are operators of American Job Centers across the country. The person has an obvious disability, and before they even get going, in fact, this happened with a member of our staff who went into the AJC. I won't name the area to protect them, but immediately, they didn't even get a conversation going to learn and be oriented to the services, immediately said, we've got to refer you to vocational rehabilitation. I'm interested whether in Missouri you're working on that and how you've got a strong collaboration going. Some thoughts on how we continue to look, as just was described, the universal design of services under the workforce development system.
Well, Danielle, if you don't mind, this is Yvonne. I'll start, but the first thing that comes to mind is, we know that has existed in Missouri. I'm sure that we still have challenges ahead of us with that. About 4 years ago, when Danielle and I were working together, just trying to do a better job of implementing some of these outreach opportunities, we actually set up some statewide disability training. And we went into every career center in the state of Missouri and provided consistent training to every staff member about that very thing. Not only a disability awareness and sensitivity type training, but also how to be aware that anybody who comes to the career center, and I'm going to steal Danielle's words because they're some of my favorite language that she uses. When a person walks into the career center, whether they have a disability or not, they came to the career center, not to voc rehab. That doesn't mean that voc rehab couldn't be an option, but they're there because they are pursuing career center services. So it is our responsibility in this workforce system to make sure that they are felt that they are given the services that are available at that career center. Vocational rehabilitation could be a part of those services, but they should be an enhancement of those services and not always just directing them over to our program.
And this is Danielle. Thanks, Yvonne. This is one of my pet peeves, and Yvonne knows this clearly. When we're monitoring our local boards, we check to see if they are referring a customer directly to VR without seeing if they could service that person with the disability without the referral. So, you know, one thing, you can use Section 188 as a framework to do your training and to let staff know that, you know, they are there, just like Yvonne was saying, they are there for services. And if that customer needs additional assistance, then you can make that recommendation or that referral. But don't use that as your first resource or your first initiative with that customer.
Thank you both. I think that's a terrific picture and framework to think about this challenge, and I do think we're making progress across the country, and appreciate the answer from what you're doing in your state. Let me go to the next question, and I think we know everywhere that just like the Americans with Disabilities Act in a general sense, physical barriers have been reduced and eliminated in so many different kinds of environments. But there is this other concept, and it moves beyond physical accessibility to program accessibility. It's certainly a part of the intention of Section 188. And again, I'll open it up if there's a member of the panel. How can we help people better understand the concept of program accessibility? Anyone want to take that on?
This is David, and one of the guidance that I would recommend folks take a look at is the one-stop vision guidance. And that pretty much outlines from a high-level picture of what we mean by program and physical accessibility. The good news is, over the coming months, ETA, with our partners, core partners from education, we will be issuing more detailed guidance, operational guidance as to, you know, how it can be implemented further with program accessibility. So I encourage very much folks to refer to the one-stop vision guidance that pretty much outlines, you know, the goals related to program accessibility.
This is Michael. This is Jamie.
Go ahead, Jamie.
I would just add that, you know, we would urge workforce centers to take a look at, you know, is there representation of people with disabilities across the spectrum of your programs? And that doesn't mean that the workforce center has to be solely serving that person. There really should be some type of integrated service delivery. That is really the only way you're going to be able to serve such a diversified group of people, and especially people with disabilities with all kinds of choices, right, and also needs and accommodations. So, you know, looking at cost, you know, is your workforce center involved in integrated resource teams where they're coming together, not just with VR, but with other service systems to cost share, to support and be able to kind of, you know, do your part. We always talk to the workforce center about those types of experiences and those teams, as we're really only asking you to do what you do best and what you offer somebody. Another organization can do what they do best and bring that to the table. So that's an area I would encourage workers to look at.
Thank you, Jamie. Was someone else trying to
Michael,
jump in?
This is Chris from ODEP, and I think the comments that have been made already are excellent. I would throw one more out there, and that is that the research is really solid on leadership as essential for creating change. And where you have leaders, you can move systems in directions that they might not have been in before. And that's just the importance of leadership, and leadership training is just critical. It's really solid in the research. And Department of Labor, ETA, and Department of Education, and basically the WIOA implementation team is going to be bringing in next week state leaders from across the nation, for a national convening focused on WIOA implementation. And I know we're all really excited about the meeting. We're all really exhausted from helping to try to put everything together, but I'm just really pleased that disability is very much a part of that national convening in terms of educating these leaders across systems from the states about the importance of not just physical but programmatic accessibility and universal design and a lot of the things that we've been talking about today that are very much going to be front and center in front of those leaders next week when they are here in town.
Thank you, Chris. And boy, we're getting a lot going on in the chat box. I'm going to come over to it for a moment, stop our questions. One simple one is someone wanted to know Kim's last name. It's Kim Vitelli, and they want to know where she works. Hopefully they were impressed. I thought her comments were excellent. Kim is with the Employment and Training Administration, so simple one to answer. Another was more of a comment than a question. What about make sure we mention Section 503. The final rules on Section 503 created new affirmative obligations on federal contractors. A huge number of employers are federal contractors across market sectors doing business with the federal government. They have new requirements which will be monitored both by an office at Department of Labor and also by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC. And here really is an interesting intersect with the work that all workforce development boards, majority of individuals represent employers, and the whole service delivery system with a focus on really looking at labor data and understanding where are the jobs for the future, the career pathways for the future, what skills will be needed to by job applicants to meet employer demands. So yes, I echo what one commenter made is this is a topic for a workforce development board to think about what is this equal opportunity role under Section 188 and really getting engaged with federal contractors who have really some new motivation on top of the, what already existed to meet and comply with Section 503 requirements. There was also a question, are AJC staff prepared for employers who are now actively seeking new pipelines of talent with disabilities? I think it's a great question. Here again, we have an opportunity that we have to continue to train. We have to continue to sensitize. But I'm going to throw that question back to the Missouri members of our panel. Are AJC staff prepared for employers who are actively seeking new pipelines of talent with disabilities? And I wonder if Danielle or Yvonne want to try to respond.
Yvonne, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. We're getting there. I mean, I'm not going to get on this webinar and tell you that we're just raring to go on that. When I brought up how we're collaboratively reaching out to these employers on the survey, that's one step forward on how we were trying to work with employers together. And, you know, that's just, to me, common sense. I've always said all along, you know, that anyone who goes out from the workforce development end and talks to an employer, if an employer says to you, hey, do you also provide information and help on working with people with disabilities or employing people with disabilities? I hope that every person out in the workforce field could say, yes, we do. Let me get you in touch with that person that we have a partnership with. I don't think anybody expects everybody to have all the answers. I think it's about making sure, it's just really about partnership and collaboration and making sure that the right people are at the table. To address 503 for just a second, of course, in Missouri, we've been, especially in VR, we've really been dealing with the federal contractors for quite a while. But what we have found is that when we go and talk to employers, I can't tell you how many times I've sat down with a corporation who says, and you also work with veterans, right? And the answer to that is, well, we will work with veterans if they come in and they have a disability and are seeking those rehab services. But what it has caused me to do is make sure that I am up on having my partners from workforce development who serve veterans there at the table with me, or even now outreaching to those employers that are federal contractors and asking them if they want me to go ahead and bring my partners with me to the table. So I think it's a work in progress. I would love to tell you that we're just right there, but I can say this: I definitely feel as though we have a partnership in place where if there were any needs, I think I mentioned this last week when we were talking with the Lead Center. We actually had a person who works at a local job center reach out to one of my business people because she'd been at an employer and the employer had asked, and she said, let me check. And we actually went over last week and did a disability awareness training with that employer with our workforce partners at the table as well. So it's just about common sense partnership and making sure that we do it together. Not every one entity has to have all the answers.
Thank you for that answer. I want to go to our last question. I'm going to skip a few because of the time and just see whether we might get a quick final comment from each of our federal partners. I'll start with CRC, Civil Rights Center, and Roger. Just any final comment or focus you'd like to leave our diverse audience with in terms of thinking in the future about 188?
Well, two things going on with us. Don't forget, we've got an NPRM out there. We really are interested in to hear what you think about it, the way we've integrated disability laws into the new rule. And I think part of we really want to emphasize is that we're working really closely together with ETA and ODEP. It really is to make it a partnership, so it's not just an enforcement thing. We don't want to be just positioned saying, oops, we caught you not doing it, and leave it at that. We're really trying to figure out ways on the front end to get the word out. Here, you have to do it, but here are all the ways you can do it. And so I really like the partnerships that we've developed over the last couple of years, and we look forward to continuing it.
Thank you, Roger. I turn to David Jones with ETA. Any last kind of comment or advice to our audience?
Sure. I'm going to build on some of the key points mentioned earlier, and they are in 3 areas, and these are based on my experience when visiting different offices in the field. Just maintaining that open dialogue, just building that relationship and strengthening the leadership between agencies, I think is going to benefit all. Just always having that antenna raised, just being mindful of the environment and the challenges of individuals with disabilities may be experiencing, I think is very critical. And, just being, not turning a blind eye, just kind of always having that antenna up. And finally, reviewing your policies. I think that's often, put on a shelf, and sometimes dusting it off and kind of going through it is important to make sure that it is current. So I think those 3 areas I think would be helpful to many folks.
Thank you, David. Very helpful. And let me turn last to ODEP and either Chris or Richard.
Thank you, Michael. I think in addition to what has already been said, I would just reflect for a moment on the fact that we've talked about universal design and 188 within the context of universal design. When we are making adjustments to our programs and services through the lens of universal design, we are really helping ourselves as systems serve many people with different barriers to employment, not just people with disabilities, because many of those adjustments are in fact things that will help not just someone with a disability, but someone who might be challenged with the English language, or challenged with child care issues, or challenged with any of a number of barriers. So that as you're looking at the suggestions that the 188 guide provides, you can think about not just in terms of disability, but how those can help you across the board with other people with challenges and barriers to employment. And number two, I would say that we are looking forward here at Labor, and specifically at ODEP, for the ongoing collaboration, Michael, with you all at the LEAD Center. I know you're going to be doing a series of webinars and producing some materials as WIOA is rolled out that are specific to individuals with disabilities, and I would urge everyone to be kind of tuning in and watching for those in the near future and throughout the year as we continue to just leverage this really important time with a new law that's so important for youth and adults with disabilities, and it's being rolled out, and you have an opportunity to really impact implementation that's going to make a difference potentially for years to come.
Thank you, Chris, and let me thank all our panelists, Danielle and Yvonne in Missouri, and our panelists at the federal level as well. Please save the date for our next webinar, which is going to be looking at implementation of partnerships, focusing on the role of Centers for Independent Living, working with the Workforce Development System, February 25th from 3 to 4:30 Eastern Time. I also want to share with you, again, a slide with some of the resources, the website for the LEAD Center, leadcenter.org, that Employment First portal on the LEAD Center website, an enormous amount of resources to compare and contrast what states are doing in achieving employment outcomes for people with disabilities and other ways to interact with the LEAD Center. I think as we end today, clearly we heard over and over again, partnership, 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 and collaboration, not one time, but long term. Don't stop and don't look back, look ahead. I love David's comment too, which is we write policies, we put them on the shelf. No, policies are supposed to be alive, and you want to revisit them, and you want to sit down with the disability community to see how it can work. And really, our Missouri collaborators are all about how the different parts of the system can work together, both at a state level and across local communities, which has clearly been what has been this collaboration in preparing these promising ideas related to implementation of Section 188, Civil Rights Center, Employment and Training Administration, and disability employment policy working together. So thank you for joining us today. We hope you'll join us again next month in February and visit the LEAD Center for an extraordinary array of resources to look at WIOA implementation from a disability perspective. Thank you and have a great afternoon.